At this point in time, Wisconsin is shaping up to be the most important state for either candidate in 2024 to get to 270 because it makes the difference for either campaign to get to 270. This is where I think the states are leaning at this point in time in November. If Joe Biden wins Wisconsin, he gets exactly 270 electoral votes. If Donald Trump wins in Wisconsin, he gets 278. So this is the toss-up of toss-ups. And I think Wisconsin is tough to categorize for a variety of reasons, as we're going to get in this video. But the other states that are sort of in the toss-up battleground category, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, I've put leans on this map just because this is where I think they're leaning at this point in time. You'll notice the Rust Belt is sort of a light shade of blue. That's mostly because Democrats have more of a fundamental advantage here. It's obviously friendlier territory for them. And also, Donald Trump is only pulling ahead in these states by less than 2 points. The Sun Belt, on the other hand, is a very different story. In Georgia, Donald Trump is up by around 5. Arizona and Nevada up by very similar margins. So the Sun Belt is definitely more likely to go in the Trump category than the Rust Belt. So that's why we're focusing so much on Wisconsin, because I think this is the state that is going to make the difference between a Trump presidency or another 4 years of Joe Biden. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Wisconsin is statistically a dead heat. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are essentially at a complete tie. Trump is up by the absolute tiniest of margins. And if we take a look at the trends in Wisconsin, going all the way back to the fall of last year, Trump was up by a small margin. Joe Biden shot up for a long time. You had a statistical tie for the entire month of January. Trump leading, and Trump has really led in the Wisconsin aggregate ever since about February of 2024. So Trump has consistently been up now for several months. And obviously, that's good news for him. You don't want to be pulling down in a state like Wisconsin, which has historically been a state that has underestimated Republican support. Obviously, the big caveat to that, of course, was the 2022 midterms, where the polls pretty much universally underestimated Democratic enthusiasm. Now, I think 2024 is going to be decently different than that because there really isn't as much enthusiasm behind Joe Biden. If there is any enthusiasm on the Democratic side, I think it's anti-Trump enthusiasm and certainly not pro-Biden enthusiasm. And that's what we saw back in the 2020 election. That's probably one of the reasons why Donald Trump overperformed the polls, because in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Trump was down by much larger margins than he ended up losing the states. Pennsylvania, he only lost by 1.2. Michigan, he only lost by 2.8. And Wisconsin, he only lost by 0.6, which is actually a closer margin than his victory back in 2016. So Wisconsin will make or break, I believe, the 2020 election, because it seems like at this point in time, Arizona and Georgia have sort of come home to the GOP. Donald Trump is doing very well there. Republicans are doing better there. And I think in Arizona in particular, you have this whole scandal now brewing with the governor in regards to a pay-to-play scheme that's been going on. And that's certainly something that could damage the Democratic brand there. So you have that coupled with the fact that Joe Biden is incredibly unpopular there. He's underwater by 32 points. It seems very hard to believe that Joe Biden would still win Arizona at this point, although I don't deny that it's going to be close because Arizona is a very competitive state demographically. Republicans are at more of a disadvantage now than they were back in 2016 based on the population shifts. But at this point in time, it looks like Republicans still have the edge. Wisconsin, I think, is the pure toss-up, because if we take a look at Joe Biden's approval rating in Wisconsin, out of every single swing state we talk about, it's the best in Wisconsin. He's at a 42% approval, a 53% disapproval. That only puts him at a net approval of -11. For comparison, in Michigan, Joe Biden is underwater by 28 points. Pennsylvania, he's underwater by 24. Nevada, he's underwater by 33. Georgia, he's underwater by 29. North Carolina, underwater by 22. So the reason I put Michigan and Pennsylvania down as more pro-Biden than Wisconsin is purely because of the state's partisanship. These are just bluer states in general than Wisconsin. But if you were to base it off of Joe Biden's favorability, Wisconsin would probably be the bluest of the Rust Belt states. But if you go back all the way to 2004, it is the more Republican-friendly of the Rust Belt states. And we've even seen that evidenced in the 2022 midterms. You know, Tony Evers won re-election. He overperformed the polls, beating Tim Michels, who was a pretty poor candidate, lazy campaigner. If we move up to the Senate election, Ron Johnson was still able to hold on in the state, despite the fact that Democrats were massively overperforming their polls across the country. And you saw sort of a red ripple rather than a red wave. And Ron Johnson was up in the polls by 5 points, and he managed to hold on, which honestly, in retrospect, is pretty impressive given the fact that Dr. Oz ended up losing Pennsylvania by 5, a state that he was actually pulling ahead in. And of course, you saw in Michigan, obviously a pretty massive blue wave there. And of course, in Arizona, you saw a blue wave there as well, where Republicans were all up in the polls. So the fact that Wisconsin reelected Senator Johnson, I think, is a testament to just how purple this state actually is. And Wisconsin's really one of the only true purple states I think there is in the entire country, because if you take a look at the map, Michigan is certainly more Democratic leaning, as is Pennsylvania, as is Nevada, as is Arizona. Georgia's really and North Carolina, those are really the only 2 battleground states that have a true Republican lean. So you could categorize all of these states, but I think Wisconsin is one of the only true toss-ups. In 2022, really backed that assertion up, because Ron Johnson was able to hold on in the suburbs around Milwaukee. This is critical territory for any Republican winning the state of Wisconsin. We could compare the numbers in Ozaukee County and Waukesha County, for example. 63% for Johnson and 58% for Johnson in Waukesha County. We compare that to Trump's numbers, and you see that Waukesha, Trump is under 60% there, and in Ozaukee, he's only winning by 12 points. So already you have Ron Johnson doing considerably better in suburban Milwaukee than Donald Trump. Washington County, 71% of the vote going to Johnson. Donald Trump only gets 68% of the vote there. So Johnson's strength was in the wow counties around Milwaukee. If you take a look at Dane County, for example. Now, this is a county that's incredibly blue, and it's growing in population. It's home to Madison, Wisconsin. Ron Johnson got 23% of the vote here. Mandela Barnes got 77. So 77% of the vote in Wisconsin with decent numbers in the wow county still isn't enough to win the state overall. Tony Evers, on the other hand, got 79%. Michaels only getting 21. And of course, Michaels did worse in the wow counties. That's why he lost by the margin that he did. Now, in 2020, Joe Biden only got 75% of the vote in Dane County. So this was actually an election where the state was considerably bluer, and there's a smaller margin for the Democrat in Dane County as compared to the Senate election, which means Madison County is pretty much zooming to the left. Now, it's always been a very leftward county, but Democrats are always bordering around 80%. And in some races, like we've seen for the Supreme Court election, Democrats did break 80% in Dane County, which is massive because this is a population center. And this is an area where Republicans need to keep Democrats under about 80% in order to win statewide. And we're looking at a situation where if the trends continue in Dane County, you could potentially see Joe Biden win the state just because of that. Now, I think a silver lining for Republicans is that you have a lot of left-wing dissatisfaction with Joe Biden. Dane County is a super liberal, highly college-educated county, and that's probably an area where you're going to see more depressed turnout for Joe Biden and possibly a higher share of the third-party vote. I mean, if we go back to 2016, for example, Hillary Clinton only got 70% of the vote in Dane County. Obama got 71%. So you did see a pretty decent breakaway from the Democrat and towards third-party candidates. That's something that Donald Trump is going to have to count on if he wants to carry the state. Now, I think another important area to carry is, of course, the Green Bay region in northeastern Wisconsin. Winnebago County, for example, Donald Trump winning there by around 4 points. Brown County, home to Green Bay. That's an important Republican stronghold. In 2016, Donald Trump won here by 11 points. In 2020, he only won by 7. So, getting a decent margin in population centers that are friendly to Republicans is obviously super critical. Another area, the Driftless area in southwestern Wisconsin, is sort of a bellwether. We actually saw some trends towards the right in some of these counties. 2016, obviously, you saw massive shifts to the right. You had some of these counties going for Obama by safe margins and then going to Trump by borderline safe margins. This county went from 20 points Obama to Trump plus 5, which is really incredible to see a giant shift like that. But in rural counties in the Midwest, that's what we've been seeing over the past couple election cycles. So that's really what it takes for Donald Trump to win Wisconsin back. Joe Biden is playing defense in this election. He needs to defend the states that he won in 2020. Now, the good news for him is that he doesn't need every state he won in 2020. For example, Joe Biden could afford to lose Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada and still win the election provided he wins Wisconsin. Now, if Biden were to win Nevada and win Arizona, he would win the election even if Donald Trump managed to win Wisconsin. Now, this seems like a very unlikely scenario at this point in time, just based on the polling. Again, Arizona is just a redder state than Wisconsin typically. But in the unlikely scenario this did happen, Trump would have to pick off Pennsylvania or Michigan in order to become president again. And I think the most likely scenario at this point in time is Arizona and Nevada both going red, and then Wisconsin sort of being the deciding factor in all of this. And that's why Wisconsin is likely to decide the election. I think back in 2020, that was sort of the status we gave Pennsylvania. It was seen that Wisconsin was most likely probably going to go blue. Michigan was going to go blue. And I think it all came down to the Keystone State in Pennsylvania. And I said whatever candidate carries Pennsylvania is probably going to win the election. And that was accurate. I think that's going to be the case for Wisconsin this time around. So we're going to have to see where the polls end up going over the next few months. We're obviously going to watch Wisconsin very closely. We're probably going to talk about the Wisconsin Senate race at some point soon, because that also plays a role and could potentially decide the balance of power in the Senate, although I think that's not as likely because Montana's more likely to do that. But nonetheless, it's a very important state and probably the next most likely pickup for the Republicans after obviously Montana and Ohio. But we'll save that, of course, for a future video. As always, again, thank you all for watching. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next one.